She was supposed to be at the hospital until 7. The shift had ended 4 hours early. A scheduling error, a supervisor who sent her home without ceremony, and Audra had taken the extra time to stop at the pharmacy on Maple. Pearl's vitamins, a box of chamomile. One other thing, tucked in the bottom of the bag under the receipt, a test. She'd known for 2 weeks already, not known the way you know facts, but known the way your body tells you something before your brain is ready to agree. She was going to tell Pierce that night. She had a speech half ready, nothing fancy, just something warm that said, "I'm scared and happy, and I need you to be both of those things with me." She'd rehearsed it in the car on the way home, the words arranged and rearranged until they felt right. She heard them before she made it down the hallway. Audra stood at the front door for a moment that seemed to bend around itself. Her work bag was still on her shoulder. Her keys were in her hand. The pharmacy bag was tucked under her arm with the receipt still sticking out. She walked to the bedroom door. She didn't decide to. Her legs kept moving the way they do when you need to be certain, when you need the kind of proof that cannot be walked back from later. She had proof. Daphne's face was the thing she kept coming back to in the weeks and months after. Not Pierce's, though Pierce's expression was its own specific horror, that combination of shock and calculation moving through him like weather. It was Daphne's face that did something different, something that looked almost like relief. Like she'd been waiting for this, and now that it had arrived, at least the waiting was finished. Audra stood in the doorway for 4 seconds. She counted them. Then she stepped back, pulled the door shut, and walked to the kitchen. She put the pharmacy bag on the counter. She filled the kettle. She stood at the stove and watched the coil turn red and thought about nothing, which was the only way she could manage to think at all right then. Pierce came out first. His shirt was inside out. He had the posture of a man who had prepared several explanations and forgotten every one of them simultaneously. Audra, don't. Don't what? Her voice was completely even. Not a performance. She was simply somewhere beneath the place where her voice could break. Finish making tea? Can we just talk? I need you to stop talking. She said it the way she said things to distressed patients in the ER, level, clear, non-negotiable. I mean that literally. I need quiet. He stopped. Daphne appeared in the doorway, wrapped in the throw blanket from the living room couch. She had been in this apartment 24 times. She knew exactly where Audra kept that blanket. Audra, please. Don't. Audra didn't look at her. She poured the water. She watched the tea steep. There is no sentence that starts with my name and your voice right now that I'm prepared to hear. She drank the tea. She did not rush it. She stood at her own kitchen counter and drank to the last cold sip, while Pierce stood 8 feet away with his shirt inside out, and Daphne eventually, quietly, let herself out through the front door without another word. Pierce tried one more time. He told her he'd gotten lonely. He told her she was working doubles every week, that he hadn't meant for it to happen the way it did. She watched him build the explanation the way she'd watch someone assemble something they already knew wouldn't hold weight. You're making excuses, she said. I know you know that. I'm watching you know it. She rinsed her mug. She dried it. She put it back in the cabinet. I'm going to take my things from the bedroom, she said. You should find somewhere else tonight. He said, where are you even going to go? She paused at the kitchen doorway and thought about the question honestly for exactly 2 seconds. Somewhere that isn't here, she said, and that was the end of that conversation. She packed a bag. She did not cry. She drove to a park 6 blocks away and sat in her car with the pharmacy bag on the passenger seat and let her hands shake, as they were going to do it regardless, and at least here there was no one to see them. She was 30 years old. She was a nurse practitioner with 4 years of clinical experience, 2 published case studies, and a reputation for the kind of calm that made attending physicians specifically request her on difficult nights. She was also, as of 3 weeks ago, pregnant. She had been planning to say that out loud for the first time tonight. She sat in the car until the shaking passed. She did not make decisions. She just let the time go by. 2 days later, a number she'd saved in her phone 8 months ago and never called rang her back instead. The Coastal Health Clinic in Beaufort, South Carolina had a position open. She'd been waitlisted, they'd reconsidered. Would she still be interested? She said yes before the sentence finished. The next 3 weeks were the most methodical she had ever been. Lease broken, penalty absorbed without argument. New lease signed by email. Storage unit rented, Cars Ervist, OB appointment booked at a clinic near her new address. She told no one about the pregnancy. Not her mother, not her coworkers, not the 3 mutual friends who texted asking if she was okay. She responded to those with, "I'm fine." Just needed a change. Pierce called 11 times. She declined each one. On the 3rd day, she blocked the number and did not look at it again. She drove south with what fit in the car. She didn't check the rear-view mirror when she left the city. She had a full tank of gas and a prenatal vitamin in her jacket pocket, and somewhere underneath everything she'd just lost, a direction. That was enough. Beaufort was different from anything she'd planned. The air was salt-thick, warmer than October had any right to be, the kind of air that asks something of you and then slowly gives something back. The clinic sat a quarter-mile from the water. Her supervisor was a woman named Dr. Harlan, who ran the practice with the brisk certainty of someone who had seen everything twice and was still improbably interested. At their first meeting, Harlan handed her a patient file without ceremony and said, "You're going to be fine here. I don't pull people off wait lists on a feeling." Audra opened the file and got to work. Her daughter arrived the following April. 7 pounds, 2 ounces, with a look of focused inconvenience she would maintain for several weeks before settling into curiosity. Audra named her Pearl. She'd looked out the hospital window the morning after, at the harbor doing its harbor thing, and the name had simply arrived. Something formed around something hard, shaped by pressure into something you keep. Pearl grew up alongside Audra's career in a way that felt less like parallel tracks and more like the same train. The clinic became a place Audra knew the way you know your own kitchen, not because it was easy, but because she'd worked every surface of it. She learned her patients the way she'd learned the city, block by block, story by story, without rushing the understanding. Harlan pushed her, and she pushed back, and they argued productively about intake protocols and triage standards and the specific question of when institutional caution becomes institutional failure. Pearl, at 2, could identify 14 species of shorebird and had opinions about their relative merits. Pearl, at 3, announced she wanted to be a fish when she grew up. Pearl, at 4, was wearing rain boots with frogs on them on a Tuesday with no forecast of rain whatsoever, because she was 4 and she made her own decisions about footwear. The man who brought coffee to the clinic was named Arlo. He was a marine biologist at the research station half a mile down the coast, and he had first appeared in the waiting room 8 months ago with a broken thumb from a rope handling incident. He had returned 4 times after that with a sequence of minor ailments that Audra had eventually recognized as implausible. He never explained his visits. He never pushed for explanation in return. He just showed up, brought coffee from the stand near the dock, said things that were the exact right length, and left when it seemed appropriate. He had, without any discussion of the matter, become a consistent feature of her landscape in the way that certain people become. Not dramatically, but so gradually and so steadily that one day you realize you've been accounting for their presence without knowing you were doing it. She'd told him about Pierce 3 weeks ago, in the middle of a conversation about something else entirely. She'd said, "My ex showed up at the clinic on Tuesday." He'd said, "How was that?" She'd said, "Strange, like seeing a photograph of a life that didn't develop." He'd said, "Yeah, those are strange." And that had been the entire conversation, which was exactly the right size. The letter from the Regional Health Authority came on a Thursday morning. Clinical Director, Coastal Health Initiative. Audra read it twice at her kitchen table, while Pearl provided running commentary on a cartoon dog in the next room. She set the letter down. She looked at the ceiling. She called Harlan. "About time," Harlan said. "The scope requires." Accepting. The scope requires accepting. A pause. Stop managing your expectations. You built this record. Let yourself know that. She let herself know it for approximately 45 seconds before she started making the list of everything that needed to happen next. Her name appeared in the regional paper that Thursday. She saw it shared twice on professional networks. It didn't occur to her to calculate who might see it. 3 weeks later, Pierce walked into the clinic waiting room and sat down. She saw him through the glass of her office window. The years had moved through him in the way that years do when they've actually reached someone. He looked older in a real way, not a bad way, but an actual one. He had a coat she didn't recognize. He had the posture of a man who had prepared for this from several angles and was still uncertain he'd chosen correctly. She went out. He stood when he saw her. He started to say something and then stopped and started over. "I saw the article," he said. Most people in the region did. She walked toward the parking lot and he followed because that was the shape he was still in. The shape of someone who followed where she led, even now. Outside, she crossed her arms and looked at him with the expression she'd developed over 4 years of delivering difficult information to families who weren't ready to receive it. Present, clear, not invested in the outcome. "I know I don't have a right to anything," he said. "I'm not here to ask for anything. I just needed." He stopped. "I'm sorry. I know what I did. I've thought about it every day since, and I don't have an explanation that makes it better. I just needed to say the actual words to your actual face." "Okay," she said. He blinked. He looked like he'd prepared for more. "That's it?" he said. "What were you hoping for?" He opened his mouth and closed it again. She watched the calculation fall out of his expression, replaced by something more unguarded. The specific look of a man who has been carrying something for 4 years and has finally gotten to put it down, only to find that putting it down doesn't fix the thing the carrying was supposed to fix. She almost felt sorry for him. She noticed the almost, filed it. The day caravan came around the corner at 5:14. She heard it before she saw it. That particular rumbling engine, those particular small voices. Pearl was the third one off the van. She was wearing the frog boots, as expected, and carrying a drawing that appeared to depict either a large bird or a submarine. It was genuinely unclear. She saw Audra and ran full speed across the parking lot. Audra crouched and opened her arms, and Pearl hit her like a small, determined wave. "Declan ate a crayon today," Pearl reported, face pressed against Audra's shoulder. "How is Declan?" "Fine," he said. Green tasted like a birthday candle. When Audra looked up, Pierce was staring. She watched the understanding move across his face, the dark hair, the specific angle of Pearl's jaw, the way she had Audra's eyes and something else, something older, something he recognized because it had once been in the room with him every day. "Is she?" he started. "She's mine." Audra's voice came out level and absolute. "That's what she is." He was quiet for a long moment. "I had a right to know," he said. It came out raw, not calculated. "You had a right to be someone I could trust with it." She stood, took Pearl's hand. "You chose something different. Those two things exist at the same time, and neither one cancels out the other." She walked to the car. She buckled Pearl in. She started the engine. She did not look back. She didn't hear about Daphne until 3 weeks later, when a certified letter arrived from the State Board of Nursing. A formal complaint had been filed, falsified residency hours, specific dates, program names, information a stranger couldn't have known, information she had shared years ago in a late-night phone call with her closest friend, in the specific way you share things with the person you trust most, casually, completely, without armor. She sat in her office and read the document twice. She thought about Daphne's phone call from 7 months ago, the one she'd answered on instinct, the short, stilted apology, the "I hear you" she'd offered before ending the call. She had thought that door was shut clean. She opened a new folder on her desktop. She labeled it with a date and nothing else. She started building. 6 evenings, working after Pearl went to bed, residency sign-in sheets, supervisor evaluations, independent committee assessments, with 3 signatures, none of which were from anyone she knew. Time-stamped documentation going back 7 years, organized with the same methodology she used for complex patient histories. Not to persuade, but to make the truth impossible to credibly dispute. On the 4th evening, Arlo knocked. He had takeout containers and no particular explanation. He came in, set the food on the counter, read the screen without touching anything, and sat down across from her. He did not ask if she was okay. He did not offer the kind of focused listening that requires the other person to tend to the listener. He just sat and ate and was there. And sometime around 10 o'clock she said without looking up, "I built a real record. I know what it says." "I know you did," he said. She looked at him. He was reading something on his own laptop, research data, tidal measurements, something involving salinity levels that had nothing to do with any of this. He was not performing patience at her. He was simply present the way that he was always simply present, without requiring her to be different than she was. She went back to work. The board issued its ruling 6 weeks later. Complaint dismissed. Record verified by 3 independent sources. The formal finding noted that the complaint appeared to rely on information not available through public channels, and referred the matter for further review. Daphne received a formal notice of inquiry that autumn, a finding of filing a knowingly false complaint, a record, a referral to the ethics board of her own professional association. The professional consequences were proportional and documented and public. Audra read the outcome in her office on a Friday afternoon. She sat with it. She felt something she hadn't anticipated. Not satisfaction, not triumph, but a specific quiet. The kind that arrives when something resolved for a very long time finally resolves, and you realize the resolution doesn't erase the cause, just contains it, finishes it, makes it something you can carry in a smaller part of yourself. She closed the document. She had a 3 o'clock appointment. She went. Pierce sent a letter in November, handwritten, plain paper, forwarded from the clinic address to her home. She opened it at the kitchen table on a Saturday morning, while Pearl ate cereal and narrated an elaborate ongoing story she was inventing about a fish who wanted to ride a bicycle. He wrote that he understood why she hadn't told him about Pearl. He wrote that he wasn't asking for anything. He wrote that he had spent a long time trying to understand what kind of man he'd been at 33, and that the understanding, when it finally came, had not been comfortable to hold. He wrote that the work she'd done, not the directorship, though he'd read about it, but the work of becoming who she'd become, had been visible to at least one person who would have given almost anything to have been the one standing beside her while she built it. He wasn't. He knew that. He was learning. He wrote to know it without explanation. She read it twice. She folded it and put it in the drawer where she kept finished things. Pearl said, "Mama, do you think fish get lonely?" Audra looked up from the drawer. "I think some fish find the right water," she said, "and stop worrying about the rest of it." Pearl considered this with the gravity of someone who takes fish welfare seriously. "That's a weird answer." "Yeah," Audra said, "it is." She picked up her coffee. It was exactly the right temperature. Outside the kitchen window, the harbor was doing what the harbor did, shifting, continuous, indifferent, in the specific way that indifference can be a relief rather than a wound. The light came in at the low morning angle she had come to understand was particular to this latitude, this time of year, this kitchen. Pearl had moved on from the bicycle and was now explaining, with great authority, that the fish would need a helmet. She was gesturing with her spoon to illustrate. There was cereal milk on the table, and a crayon drawing of something that might have been the ocean taped to the wall above the toaster, and a pair of frog boots drying by the door. Audra sat down across from her daughter. She was 35. She had a clinical directorship and a 4-year-old who asked the best questions, and a man who brought coffee without needing to announce it, and a drawer full of things that were finished, and a kitchen where the morning light did something worth seeing. She had not planned any of this. She had planned a different life, and that life had collapsed in a single morning 5 years ago, when she was standing in her own kitchen with a pharmacy bag and cold tea and hands that wouldn't stop shaking. She had made one decision in that parking lot afterward, sitting in the dark. Not toward anything specific, just in a direction. That was all she'd had. She'd moved in that direction and kept moving, and the keeping had built something she hadn't known to want. It was hers. That was the part that mattered. Not because she had suffered for it, but because she had built it deliberately, one choice at a time, starting from the one that was hardest to make when you have no evidence yet that it leads anywhere worth going. Pearl said, "Mama, the fish needs a name. What should we call the fish?" Audra looked at her daughter. "What does the fish want to be called?" Pearl thought about this with considerable seriousness. "Pearl," she said finally. Audra smiled. It arrived without being assembled, real and quick and small, the kind that doesn't need an audience. "Then that's her name," she said. Pearl nodded, satisfied. The story continued. The harbor kept moving. The coffee stayed warm, and Audra held it with both hands and let herself be exactly, completely, unreservedly where she was.